I want to introduce Descope. Rohit, please. Descope is a great solution. We're actually using them ourselves. Rohit, please.
It's a clicker. Is this a clicker? Okay, perfect. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Rohit. I'm here with Descope, and this is my session on securing AI agents and MCP servers for the enterprise. A little bit about me. It's a picture of me there. I wanted it to be kind of serious with like a suit, but I feel like it's had the exact opposite effect where it looks like it's prom night. So please excuse that. I work at Descope. Like I said, I'm the agentic identity lead there. Prior to joining Descope, I worked at Microsoft on a few teams. I worked on the Azure teams, Azure SDKs. I also worked on VS Code and GitHub Copilot, and I led the launch of the Azure MCP server about a year ago. So definitely have been living this for a long time. Yeah, that's a little bit about me, and I'm ready to talk. So if you don't know what MCP is, don't worry. I actually asked Grok before this what MCP means, and it said Mamdani's Communist Party. Okay, that's not the right thing. Sorry. You can't trust AI. It means Model Context Protocol. So really what this means is it's a protocol that handles the model's context and gives it a standardized way to do things. So to start, we start with functions or tools. You might hear these kind of terms kind of mixed around. In general, that's what turns a model into an agent, because now the model can take actions, making it an agent, being able to do things. The main thing to understand is that the model decides when to take actions in order to complete tasks. And I think this is a really big shift because now we have actual actors. I think the idea of thinking about AI agents as threat actors is actually a great way to look at it. MCP is just the standardized way of sharing tools with LLMs, like I said, making them agents. And I'm going to say something very obvious here and what everyone else has been saying, but giving AI agents access to sensitive systems can be very dangerous. If you're online like me, you might be hearing discourse on MCP, not MCP, when to use it, when to not. In my opinion, I think we started off by MCP being the big unlock, like an agent can start to do things. And then we realized agents know how to do things anyways. We don't need to use MCP for certain things. So in my opinion, for certain tasks like, reading files or working within its own sandbox, that is a separate security thing, that is a separate solution. I don't think MCP is needed there. However, MCP becomes very, very important when an agent needs to talk to an external resource or something outside of itself. And really, that's, I think, the main benefit of MCP now is that there's a defined spec. This is kind of the general architecture of how MCP works. You have a user talking to an MCP client. That could be, ChatGPT. That could be Claude. That's your first piece of the MCP architecture. Then there's an MCP server. And the MCP server is kind of the interface between underlying APIs and resources and the AI agent itself. So the idea is if I define an MCP server, and any MCP client can now interact with my MCP server. And that's really the magic of it. There's one protocol that all the agents will speak. The MCP spec also defines an authorization server, which is what we can do at Descope. Essentially, the authorization server will handle client registration. It'll handle all the OAuth, OIDC parts of the spec. And really, this is the main security value. When an agent connects to a resource, there is a set protocol defined on when the agent actually brings in a human, the consent screen, and so on. Getting into some just general agentic identity challenges, I think, we from Descope try to treat agentic identities as a new form of identity. And I'm really glad to see a lot of people here sharing that opinion. I've been trying to say it for a while, but now, I think that we're finally understanding that this is a new class of identity problem. You've seen this number of how many machine identities to humans there is. I thought it was 80. I heard 44 before. Now it's 144. I think the number now is 400 trillion. So in general, the ratio of machine identities to humans is getting very high. And there's lots of MCP servers, but really most of them don't have security built in. And if they are, they're on API keys, which is exactly like what every vendor wants to track and manage. So it's a lot of pseudo security. Additionally, we did some research in the field, and we found a lot of CISOs are concerned with unauthorized AI agent access. And this matters a lot. Now that agents have the ability to be interacting with internal resources, you need to have a way to secure that. And like we talked about, there's a lot of pressure to adopt these systems, but not really. The security needs to catch up. And that's what I think a lot of vendors here are helping with. We've also talked about this concept of AI agents breaking traditional identity systems. Human identity, we understand pretty well. There's login screens, there's consent screens, there's multi-factor auth, there's roles, those kind of access permissions that we've defined for both our workforce and also external identities. Then there's what I think has been referred to as traditional non-human identities. It's kind of crazy to think that it's traditional, even though it's such a real issue still. But these are static and deterministic credentials. You could think of bots, simple automations, workflows that need access to certain APIs or so on, or maybe even OAuth tokens. These are traditional identities, but they're static. They don't change. What we feel is agent identities are a new type of identity that are dynamic and non-deterministic. Since agents decide what to do in a particular moment, there needs to be a new type of dynamic system to manage the permissions of an agent in real time. And it has to be designed for autonomous agents at scale. It needs to conform to the latest standards of protocols between agents, between resources, such as MCP or A2A. And it also needs to define at a very granular level what exactly the agent is doing and why. I think we've talked about OpenClaw a few times today. I think it was Jeremy from GitGuardian who talked about employees secretly using OpenClaw. This is a confession to my CISO right now that I am one of those employees using OpenClaw. But in general, I think this shows us a really useful story for agent identity. I think we can learn a lot from Uncle Ben in Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. The more useful an agent is, the more careful we have to be about the security risks. Because if we want an agent to actually do something, it needs to have credentials to do so. And how do we manage them? Also, I just love that OpenClaw has in its docs, there is no perfectly secure setup for its product. I kind of wish that there was a caveat for every single product, like you could just be insecure. Don't worry about it. In general, I think this is where we find a lot of struggles in the enterprise. There's a lot of developer work in order to be successful and in order to be secure. With MCP in particular and AI accessing, or with AI agents accessing internal resources, there's a lot of developer roadblocks. There's adding API authentication, which I think a lot of companies are still adopting. There's OAuth 2.1, like the spec suggests. There's all of the client registration methods that are defined in MCP for how an agent can actually connect to a resource dynamically instead of me provisioning a client ID, client secret manually. There's then the token management and storage for any sort of downstream services. Then we want to implement fine-grained auth at a level. Then the user consent journey as well. So in general, there are many, many steps for organizations in order to secure their systems. And that's what we feel is a very big roadblock in adopting AI. I think if anyone points to the OWASP list and mentions all 10 and says they solve all 10, you can call them a liar. But I think it's worth pointing out that a lot of identity-related mitigations are available for really all of them. Obviously, some more relevant than others. I think identity and privilege abuse is pretty related to identity in general. But in general, I think a lot of these systems could benefit from an agentic identity system. And I think it's one of the biggest problems in the space. I'll just give a second for pictures because I see some people. Okay, so I was informed I have 5 minutes. I want to stay on track. So I will run through these very quickly. If you want to take pictures of the slides while I go, please be a little bit quick. And also I'll be happy to share the slides afterwards as well. I'll be at the Descope booth in the corner. First, our suggestion is to implement the authorization spec. The authorization spec in MCP is actually optional, which I would not recommend. You should definitely implement it. It requires OAuth 2.1 with Pixie. It suggests client ID metadata document support, which I think is a very big unlock. We had a CISO earlier talking about agent cards. CIMD is a very similar solution where the agent hosts metadata on who it is. It doesn't have all the features of agent cards like purpose and so on, but it's a very big solution and a very big step to securing the true identity of an agent. Additionally, a lot of MCP auth still relies on dynamic client registration. It's not exactly a perfect solution, so we do recommend hardening on top of that, but definitely implementing support for that as well. And then lastly, your MCP servers, whether internal or external, should have user auth with SSO, and then that allows you to map groups, map roles with any sort of IDP that you use. Next is scope-based access control. I think this is the best short-term solution that we have. Function or task level scopes allow an agent with a particular token to be able to for us to look at that agent and say, it has the ability to do this, and not this. This can happen if it's external, it can happen at either the user and tenant level for B2B or B2C, or if it's internal, whatever access policies and formats you have. We also recommend starting off with minimal scopes and escalating where it makes sense, and progressively asking for more. Next up is token management. There is the token required to access an MCP server, but then there are also downstream credentials. Your API still run API keys or auth tokens. So whenever there's a connection downstream for an MCP server, we recommend for you to implement some sort of security, of course, for your APIs. Additionally, I've come across several customers now trying to ask, can I use my MCP server token for my downstream API? And I very strongly do not recommend that. And the spec actually outlines that as an anti-pattern. So there should be some sort of token exchange for an agent comes in with this token and you get a credential specially made for the downstream service. Lastly, consent management. I'm actually not sure if that's lastly. Close to lastly, there's user consent management. So making sure the user is aware of what they're allowing an agent to do in a particular time. You want to control these, you want to customize these, so it's very, very clear on what the agent can actually do. And this is the lastly, is just lifecycle management in general. You want to be able to keep track of your AI agent across ecosystems. We can promise within the Descope ecosystem, but there are plenty of vendors who do cross-cloud, cross-vendor platform discovery and management. Additionally, managing and being able to see exactly what your agents are doing with observability solutions is very important as well. Okay, one last second on the Agentic Identity Hub, which is what I work on. Our goal with Descope is to be the dedicated identity provider for AI agents. We want to serve the identities that we're talking about, this new class of identity. We support your MCP server developers with auth and tool-level access and all that. We support your AI agent builders that can connect to any sort of resource with a secure token vault. And lastly, for your IT teams, we support policies and access controls. And we have a few case studies on our website for customers using us. Okay, that's it. You can learn more at descope.ai. Thanks.